The footage that broke the case is grainy and shot in black and white night vision. October 14th at 10:42 p.m. The setting is a quiet suburban street in Portland, Oregon. At first glance, nothing seems wrong. The streetlights are dim. A woman, in a reflective, jogging vest walking a golden retriever, pausing near a driveway to adjust her headphones. She looks over her left shoulder, then looks again, sensing something that the camera cannot. A primal instinct flaring up in the silence of the suburbs. The camera captures a blur of motion as a figure dressed entirely in black sprints from the blind spot of the lens. The woman turns, but it is too late. Feed freezes for a second due to a connection lag, and when it reconnects, the street is empty. The only thing remaining is the dog, barking silently at. From a Nest doorbell camera became the most crucial piece of evidence in a case that terrified. Elena Vance was the kind of person who did everything right, who meticulously organized her life to avoid chaos. At 28 years old, talented graphic designer who worked from her home in the upscale neighborhood of Laurelhurst. It was a safe area, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's cars, where holiday decorations were taken seriously, and where people felt comfortable leaving there. Elena had moved there specifically for this sense of security, living alone and known by her friends as being cautious, responsible, and perhaps a little introverted. Her life was built on a solid, unbreakable routine. She logged on to work at 8 a.m. sharp, usually with a cup of green tea, went to the gym at 5:30 p.m. Every single night before bed, she took her dog Buster for a 20-minute walk around the block. It was her way to decompress, to listen to her podcasts, and to clear her head before. Her friends described her as vibrant, but private, not a party girl or someone who took unnecessary risks. She had a close circle of friends and a serious boyfriend named Mark who lived 3 hours away in Seattle. They were deeply in love and were planning to move in together the following spring, discussing engagement rings and looking at real estate listings. Elena was happy, with a career she loved, a dog she adored, and a future she was actively unaware that her disciplined lifestyle was being used against her. However, there was one detail about her life that she hadn't realized was dangerous. Routine was too predictable. In the world of modern stalking, consistency is a vulnerability. Walked the exact same route at the exact same time every night, walking past the same houses, and crossing the same intersections, rarely deviating by even a minute. To a casual observer, this was just a woman walking her dog, but to a predator, it was a schedule that could be. On the night of October 14th, the weather was typical for. Elena texted Mark at 10:15 p.m., sending a picture of Buster waiting by the door and saying she was taking him out quickly and would call him in 20 minutes. Mark replied with a heart emoji and a joke about the rain, unaware that this would be the last. Mark waited for the call, letting 20 minutes pass. At 11 p.m., he called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He didn't panic immediately, assuming she might have met a neighbor and started chatting. Or perhaps Buster had gotten muddy and she was giving him a bath. Something that had happened before. But when midnight hit, Mark felt a knot of dread in his stomach, because it wasn't like her to go silent, especially after promising to call. He tried to rationalize it, but the silence was deafening. He called her parents, who lived 20 minutes away from Elena, and her father, David Vance, woke up with a start. Sensing the panic in Mark's voice, David agreed to drive over to check on her, expecting to find her asleep on the couch with the phone on silent, ready to scold her for. When David arrived at the house at 12:30 a.m., the scene he found was confusing and chilling. The front door was unlocked, which was instantly wrong for Elena, who was obsessive about. But the most terrifying detail was in the backyard. Buster the golden retriever was scratching at the back door. The dog was still wearing his collar and leash, but the leash was dragging in the mud, severed halfway down with a clean, angular cut, as if it had been sliced with a sharp blade or a. David called 911 immediately, his voice trembling as he explained that his daughter was gone, and the dog had returned alone with a cut leash. The police arrived within 10. At first, the responding officers were skeptical of foul play. They treated it as a missing person case with potential for self-harm or a voluntary disappearance, noting there was no blood in the house, no signs of a struggle in the foyer, and no forced entry. It looked like she had simply stepped out and never came back. However, the severed leash told a different story. Dogs don't cut their own leashes, and someone had deliberately separated Elena from her protector to silence the only witness. The investigation began with the usual suspects, and the first person the police looked at was, statistically, when a woman disappears, it is almost always the partner. Mark drove down from Seattle immediately, arriving at the police station at 3:00 a.m., distraught and terrified. Detectives grilled him for hours, checking his phone records, his toll bridge passes, and his alibi. They needed to be sure he hadn't driven to Portland in a rage. Mark cooperated fully, handing over his phone and passwords, desperate to help find the woman he planned to marry. Held up, security cameras at his apartment complex in Seattle showed him entering his building at 6:00 p.m. and not leaving until he received the call from Elena's father. With Mark cleared, the investigation pivoted back to the street. Detective Miller, a veteran of the Portland Police Bureau, with 20 years of experience, knew that in a wealthy neighborhood like Laurelhurst, eyes everywhere, not human eyes, but digital ones. Almost every third house on the block had a smart doorbell system or a security camera mounted above the garage. Miller ordered a massive digital canvas of the neighborhood, sending officers door to door to ask residents for access to their cloud footage from the hours of 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. This is where the modern age of crime solving shines, because while a human witness might forget what they saw or misremember the color of a car, a camera records the truth without bias. It took 2 grueling days to piece together the footage. The police collected videos from 14 different houses, scrubbing through hours of nothing but rain and passing cars to create a digital map of Elena's last movements. Camera 1 at the corner of her street captured her leaving her porch at 10:18 p.m. She looked relaxed, completely unaware she was being hunted. Most terrifying footage came from the camera of the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Footage described at the beginning. It was recorded at 10:42 p.m. at the end of her route where the street loops back toward her home. The detectives watched the footage over and over, analyzing the figure in black. He was fast, wearing tactical boots and a hoodie pulled tight over his face. The way he moved suggested he had been waiting there, hiding in the shadows between the houses for at least 10 minutes. He didn't chase her from behind, but ambushed her from the side, tackling her before she could scream. The video showed the tackle, showed Elena dropping her phone, and showed the figure dragging her out of the frame into the back of a waiting vehicle that had pulled up seconds later. The entire abduction took less than 14 seconds. This wasn't a random robbery or a crime of opportunity where a thief saw a woman and acted on impulse. The word implies a history, a longing, and suggested that this man had been waiting for this specific moment for a very long time. Police ran the vehicle description through the database. A dark gray Honda Civic is one of the most common cars in America, and there were thousands in the Portland area. It felt like finding a needle in a haystack, but they had the dent in the rear bumper too. They utilized the city's traffic camera network, tracking the movements of every gray Civic in a 5-mile radius that night. Hours turned into days as analysts watched cars drive through intersections. Finally, they got a hit. At 11:15 p.m., 30 minutes after the abduction, Gray Civic ran a red light on the outskirts of the city, heading toward the Forest Service roads, near Mount Hood. The license plate was clear this time. The car belonged to a man named Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne was 32 years old and worked as a driver for a food delivery. He had no violent criminal record, his history showing only a few speeding tickets and a citation for loitering 2 years prior. On paper, he was nobody, a ghost in the gig economy, system delivering burgers and tacos to people across the city. But when detectives dug into his digital life, they found a disturbing obsession that had been festering for months. GPS data placed him in Elena's neighborhood, not just on the night of the murder, but 14 times in the previous month. He had been there on Tuesdays, Fridays, and Sundays, always, around the same time. He had never delivered food to Elena, nor had he delivered food to her immediate neighbors. He had no business reason to be on that street. Further investigation revealed the connection. That linked predator to prey. 3 months earlier, Elena had ordered a rideshare to the airport for a business trip, and Julian had been her driver. It was a 20-minute ride where they exchanged generic pleasantries about the weather and traffic. Elena, polite and kind, had likely forgotten him the moment she stepped out of the car. But Julian didn't forget. He saved her home address in his GP's labeled as the Angel. He began tracking her. Social media, which she had foolishly left public, learning her routine, learning about the dog, and learning when she was alone. He used his job as a cover. He would turn on his delivery app and drive to her neighborhood, pretending to be waiting for an order just so he could sit in his car and watch her walk Buster. He was the invisible observer, hiding in plain sight. The legitimacy of a delivery sign on his car roof. On October 17th, 3 days after Elena vanished, SWAT teams surrounded Julian Thorne's apartment in a rundown complex in downtown Portland. They breached the door at 4 a.m. using a battering ram. Inside, the apartment was sparse and smelled of stale smoke. They found in the bedroom turned the stomachs of even the most hardened officers. One wall was covered in printed photos of Elena, taken from her social media accounts, pictures of her. They found Julian asleep in his bed, seemingly unbothered by the chaos he had caused. Under his mattress, they found Elena's phone case, kept as a trophy. Trunk of his car, hidden in the spare tire well. They found the knife used to cut the leash. The interrogation was grueling. For 6 hours, Julian sat in the metal chair and said nothing, staring at the wall with a blank expression. He seemed proud of what he had done, enjoying the power of knowing something the police didn't. He refused to look at the photos of the crime. Detective Miller changed tactics. He realized Julian didn't care about the law, but he cared about his twisted fantasy of owning Elena. Miller stopped asking where Elena was and instead placed a photo of Buster the dog on the table. He told Julian that the dog was depressed and wouldn't eat, appealing to Julian's delusion that he was part of Elena's life. If you loved her like you say you do, why would you let her family suffer? Julian cracked. His fate of indifference crumbled, and he whispered, "Coordinates." Police rushed to a remote logging road 40 miles east of the city, deep in the Mount Hood National Forest. There, in a shallow grave covered by wet leaves and pine needles, they found Elena Vance. The medical examiner determined she had died of asphyxiation shortly after the abduction. It was likely she fought back in the car, realizing she was being taken, and he killed her to silence her struggle. The tragedy was absolute. A bright young woman with a promising future was gone because a stranger had decided she belonged to him. The trial was swift, but emotionally devastating. The Ring camera footage combined with the GP's data and the physical evidence left no room for doubt. The jury watched the video of the abduction in silence, many of them in tears. Julian Thorne was convicted of kidnapping and first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing, he showed no remorse, simply looking at the camera in the courtroom the same way he had looked at the camera on the street, cold and detached. Elena's father gave a victim impact statement that silenced the room, describing the pain of seeing his daughter's room exactly as she left it, the teacup still on her desk, the book still open to page 42. Elena's story changed the neighborhood and the city. People stopped walking alone at night, and the sale of security systems skyrocketed. The community realized that technology acts as a witness, but it cannot physically protect you. This case serves as a terrifying reminder of the digital footprint we all leave behind. We tag our locations, share our routines, and trust that the people driving us, delivering our food, and fixing our internet are just doing a job. 99% of the time they are. But there is that 1%, the 1% who are watching, waiting for the rain and the dark. If there is a lesson to be learned from the tragic death of Elena Vance, it is to vary your routine. If you think you are being followed, you probably. And if you see a car parked with its lights off on a street where it doesn't, don't walk past it. Turn around, go home, and lock the door. We live in a world where we are constantly being watched by lenses on doorbells and traffic poles. But the most important, eyes are your own. Stay alert, stay safe, and never assume that just because you are in a nice neighborhood, you are alone. If this story gave you chills, make sure to check your own security cameras tonight, because you never know what you might find in the playback history.